Okay, get started. So, good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Cardamom Seminar. So I'll hand over first to my colleague, Adrian, who will introduce our speaker today, Nora White.
All right, thanks very much. So our speaker today holds a PhD in early Irish from Maynooth University since 2006. She subsequently carried out postdoctoral work between 2006 and 2009 as an O'Donovan Scholar in the School of Celtic Studies at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, and as a research assistant on the IRC-funded Monasticon Hibernicum project. From 2010 to 2017, she held the position of principal investigator on the Ogham in 3D project at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. She returned to Maynooth University and the Department of Early Irish in 2019 as a postdoctoral researcher on the Chronological Hibernicum project funded by the European Research Council. In 2021, she was co-investigator with Professor David Stifter on a project EMILI, a digital corpus of early medieval Irish Latinate inscriptions, funded by an RIA Nowlan Digitisation Grant. She currently holds the position of Irish postdoctoral researcher on the UK-Ireland AHRC IRC co-funded project Ogham, harnessing digital technologies to transform understanding of Ogham writing from the 4th century to the 21st. So, it's more an honor done, Cantor an lay, Falta more her riv Cantor an lay, Nora White.
Thank you very much, Adrian Garmagad. I'm just going to start sharing first. Let me know if that's working okay.
That's good.
Yep, excellent. Okay, well, thank you very much to everyone for taking the time to join this evening, and a special thanks to the Cardamom Project for inviting me to talk at this seminar series. So although I'm not a computer scientist or even a computational linguist, like many others in humanities, my work increasingly involves digital methods and tools along with more traditional methodology to record, document, and research inscriptions in early Irish. So today I will present the work of two digital projects that I am involved in. As Adrian mentioned, the first project is Ogham, harnessing digital technologies to transform understanding of Ogham writing from the 4th right up to the 21st century. And this is a collaborative project between researchers in the Early Irish department at Maynooth University and colleagues at the University of Glasgow. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little while. And then the second project, which I will devote much less time to really in this talk, is EMILI, Early Medieval Irish Latinate Inscriptions. And this project was funded by a Royal Irish Academy Digitisation Grant in 2021. And it's the first small step really to initiate a digital corpus of early medieval Irish inscriptions in the Latin alphabet. So both the Ogham script and the Latin script. So I will start with an overview of the corpus of inscriptions. I'm not sure if many in the audience would be familiar with this material. So and then moving on then to some of the digital tools and methods used in early Irish epigraphy in the last 10 years or so. And finally, focusing on the aims and approaches planned for the current projects. So at least some of you will know that the earliest written Irish that we know of was carved in the Ogham script on stone monuments approximately 1500 years ago. Some of the larger pillar stones appear to be prehistoric standing stones onto which an Ogham inscription was later added, such as our tallest example there from the Beara Peninsula in County Cork on the left on the screen. So while others were probably sourced and erected specifically to be Ogham-inscribed, this phenomenon is likely a response to encountering a tradition of public stone monuments with writing found throughout the Roman world, including our neighbours Roman Britain. The earliest Irish inscriptions, however, are not in the familiar Roman or Latin alphabet, but in a writing system known as Ogham in modern Irish pronunciation, or Ogham in Old Irish pronunciation. Ogham is visually very unlike the Latin alphabet on which it is otherwise based. It consists of barcode-like series of parallel lines, which are more clearly seen here on the Ardmore stone on the right-hand side here. The layout is also different, as Ogham, at least in the earlier stages, displayed vertically along the edge or arras of the stone rather than horizontally on the face, generally reading upwards, sometimes continuing across the top of the stone and down the other side, and wrapping around the edge of the stone, as you can see here. So making it essentially a three-dimensional script. The script was designed specifically for the sounds of an early form of Irish, generally referred to as primitive Irish by someone who is familiar with Latin. Traditionally, it has been, this early phase has been labeled Orthodox Ogham, but in order to avoid the impression that Ogham after that period is unorthodox, the Ogham project team has recently agreed that instead we propose to call it the classical period of Ogham, in the sense of the first major flourishing of the tradition. The key to the original 20 characters in this slide is based on information supplied in later manuscript sources, demonstrating that knowledge of Ogham was not lost after the monumental phase of Ogham ended. The Ogham characters or letters are divided into 4 groups called Acma in Irish. 2 of the groups are distinguished by the orientation of 1 to 5 horizontal lines or scores relative to the vertical stem line, generally, as I said, the natural edge or arras of the stone. The 3rd group crosses the stem line diagonally, and the 4th group consists of 1 to 5 scores or notches on the stem line representing the vowels, and they usually are on these early inscriptions quite distinctively different to the consonant scores, smaller and more directly on the stem line. Each character had a name in Irish, and most are meaningful words in the language. And although we can't say exactly how far back these names go, they can tell us something about the development of the script in the post-monumental manuscript tradition. For example, some of the characters, you will see some of them here have question marks. Some of these are not attested in the inscriptions, are not consistently, and it appears that the original values or sounds have already been lost or are being lost from the language at this time. So while the core inventory of 20 characters and their values seems to have been fixed from the beginning, there has always been some experimentation with additional letters to make up for the perceived gaps in the writing system. These so-called forfida or extra characters became more prominent later on in the manuscript tradition, but at least one of these, the so-called X-forfid, is quite frequently encountered in epigraphy, where the value changes from consonant to vowel during this early phase. Ogham inscriptions are short and almost exclusively consist of personal names in the genitive case, sometimes accompanied by the father's name or the kin group name. In the first example on the left, we have the name Mochi Decadas in Old Irish Moch Decad. There is much variation in the spelling of this name in the Ogham corpus, and we have at least 4 other examples, but this is the only example surviving with the final consonant intact, and it may be approximately dated to the first half or the early second half of the 5th century AD. This is followed by Awi Tyrannius, again with the final consonant intact, meaning grandson or descendant of Torna, which may refer to the historically attested Torna, who appear to have been the leading group among the Kirigi, associated with the territory between Slieve Lucra and the sea, further to the north in what is now County Kerry. The second example has the personal name Lugudekas, a compound containing the common element Lug, a deity name, and again preserving a pre-6th century ending, not found in many of the other examples of this name in the corpus. A break in the stone after Mochi, meaning son of, has resulted in the loss of the father's name. So you can maybe see there's a break in the stone there right at the top. But the inscription continues on 2 further angles and includes another early kin group name, Mokoi Neta Segamonas, meaning something like descendant of Nad Segamon, champion of Segamo, possibly a Gaulish name. The kin group name, this kin group name also occurs on 2 other home stones in the West Waterford area, which may suggest that it was this dynasty which controlled the area in the 5th century. It is noteworthy that Aeneas Segamon is listed in the historical sources as a prehistoric king of Cashel, and his supposed grandson Luged Luigny is also listed as a prehistoric king of Munster and Ireland. Despite their brevity, we can trace the rapid development of the language in this relatively short time period in the names and patterns found in the inscriptions. Home inscriptions on stone are effectively the only source of knowledge about the Irish language for the crucial period around the middle of the 1st millennium, when primitive Irish was transformed from a traditional Old Indo-European language with stable lexical stems and inflectional endings into a modern insular Celtic language with a drastically reduced word final inflection and word initial and internal alterations instead. That is Old Irish of the 7th to 9th centuries. So here are a couple of new distribution maps by Russell O'Riordan. This is the first one, for a recently published booklet by my colleague, Professor David Stifter. Approximately 400 home stones have been identified in Ireland from this early period. They are found in most counties, but the highest concentrations by far are in Kerry, particularly the Dingle Peninsula, Cork and Waterford. We have also included here the find spots of the known portable objects with Ogham, which I will return to shortly. And interestingly, their distribution is quite different to that of the stone monuments. Ogham stones from Ireland, which are relatively homogeneous, are, however, only a part of the wider story of Ogham, which we now plan to tackle in our new collaborative Ogham project. Outside of Ireland, approximately 80 Ogham-inscribed pillar stones are found in Western Britain, primarily in Wales, Devon and Cornwall, Scotland and the Isle of Man, where they are generally understood as the primary evidence for communities of Irish settlers in post-Roman times. In Scotland, we find 6 Ogham stones with Irish names from traditionally Gaelic-speaking areas of Dalriada, modern Argyll, but over 30 from the Pictish kingdoms, mostly from the east coast of Scotland, the Orkneys and the Shetlands, which are generally more difficult to decipher, and some may be in the little-known Pictish language. Many are found on the same stone along with Pictish symbols. There are 2 developments in the Ogham script to note here on this slide. The stem line is carved onto the face of the stone rather than using the angle of the stone itself. And the vowels are represented as straight lines or scores of equal length with consonants rather than the more distinctive notches typical on Irish home stones. In Wales, Cornwall and Devon, most home stones are bilingual in Latin, script and language, or perhaps some Old British, on the face of the stone, and then in Ogham and the Irish language on the edge. You can maybe just see the ends of a few Ogham scores here along this angle. Only 5 of about 40 are monolingual Irish and Ogham. This phenomenon is very rare in Ireland, with just a couple of examples with both scripts on one stone and none with the same text in both. In addition to inscriptions on public memorial stones in Ireland and Britain, Ogham is also found, albeit in smaller numbers, much smaller numbers, on other materials, generally more portable or personal objects, such as bone knife handles, silver brooches, an amber bead, and also, of course, in manuscripts. With a small number of possibly early exceptions, these examples where they can be dated are generally a few centuries later than the earliest inscriptions on stone monuments, although some of the Ogham-inscribed stones in Scotland are also later. And these have the potential to fill in some gaps in relation to the later development of the script and its use among the general population, which can tell us something about literacy and its extent in medieval times. The post-7th century phases of Ogham have been little studied, but their geographical and functional diversity indicates that the script retained its use value and appeal, particularly among lay people. The firm establishment of Christian learning in Ireland led to the replacement of three-dimensional writing by two-dimensional literacy, primarily in the Latin alphabet across a flat page, and later the flat face of grave slabs, as we will see a bit later. In this process, the Ogham script was transformed into a learned code that was taught in vernacular education, in addition to Latin writing. Apart from a move towards horizontal, mainly left to right layout with a drawn stemline, other changes to the Ogham script also occurred, such as the addition of extra characters, or the forfeita that I mentioned earlier, reflecting the rapid change in the language and its orthography. And we also find feather marks, like you can see here, usually explained as indicating the direction to read the text, but this is actually not always the case. This phase was traditionally termed scholastic Ogham, as if the practical use of the script had ceased and it had become the object of learned interest alone. But it is becoming more and more evident that the tradition was kept alive both within scriptoria and outside. Therefore, as we have suggested the term orthodox be replaced with classical, so too we suggest that scholastic perhaps be replaced by the preferred term reformed, so that this reformed Ogham follows the spelling practice of manuscript-based Old Irish. Significantly, the Ogham script continued to flourish in Scotland among both Gaels and Picts after it had ceased to be used monumentally in Ireland. It was in Scotland that Ogham first came to the attention of rune-writing Norse settlers. Here and in the Isle of Man, Ogham carved on stone enjoyed a late flowering with a culturally mixed Norse-Celtic milieu. And in Ireland, we only have one single example of a stone with both a runic and Ogham inscription, and that's this one here from Killaloe in County Clare. Ogham remained sometimes in fantastical forms in the curriculum of formal bardic education in both Ireland and Scotland until the later Middle Ages. The alphabet's formal properties uniquely suited to cryptography, a feature which is most fully exploited in its later phases. Previous assumptions that the practical knowledge of the script had entirely withered by the early modern period had been overturned by recent discoveries in medical and other manuscript sources, including, astonishingly, a newly discovered 66-page Irish manuscript dating from 1849, containing medical charms written entirely in Ogham. And to find out more about Ogham script in manuscripts, I direct you to a series of recent blog posts by my colleague, Deborah Hayden, on our website here. And she also did a guest blog post for the Royal Irish Academy Library quite recently on the same topic. So with regard to recording and documenting Ogham, I will just briefly mention antiquarian interest, which began in the 18th century. And here we have the first officially recorded Ogham stone in Ireland from Imloch East on the Dingle Peninsula by Welsh antiquarian Edward Llwyd. And then by the 19th century, Ogham stones began to be discovered in significant numbers. And the second half of the 19th century also saw the advancement of recording techniques for carved stone in general, and photographs, as well as scale drawings made from full-size rubbings or tracings and paper casts began to appear. Cataloguing of inscriptions began in earnest in the 20th century, R.E.S. McAllister published his studies in Irish epigraphy in 3 volumes around the turn of the century, and he followed this with his Corpus Inscriptionum Insularum Celticarum in 2 volumes, which remains invaluable today. And these volumes include both inscriptions in both the Ogham script and also in the Latin script. However, the 3-dimensional nature of Ogham inscriptions on stone proved difficult to represent in 2-dimensional images. And here we see an early attempt by Samuel Ferguson to overcome this by photographing flattened out paper casts of Ogham stones. Then about 10 years ago, little more now actually, a new approach to recording and documenting Ogham was proposed and initiated at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, DIAS, with a project using 3-dimensional imaging techniques to digitize the Irish Ogham stones. And I was fortunate enough to be employed on that project. And in 2012, funding was secured from the Irish Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht to collaborate with both the National Monument Service and 3D imaging specialists, the Discovery Programme, and to prioritise digitising Ogham stones in state care in Ireland or with preservation orders. And that amounted to 73 of the total of 400 stones. So computational imaging tools such as laser and structured light scanning, photogrammetry, and RTI, which is reflectance transformation imaging, can be particularly beneficial when recording carved and inscribed stones, both in terms of aiding analysis and presenting the data. Moreover, unlike earlier methods such as rubbings and paper casts, these techniques are non-invasive and cannot damage the monuments in any way. The top 2 images here are from fieldwork carried out with Discovery Programme surveyors at Lugnagopal in County Kerry. The technique used here was structured light scanning, and this technique has the potential to capture high resolution data, including texture, with point accuracy of up to 0.1 millimeter. Handheld mobile scanners like the Arctic Ava can record large amounts of data relatively quickly and produce 3D models in real time. However, this method is expensive and more ideally suited to indoor work, as the handheld scanner is highly sensitive to light, which requires the use of a blackout tent to keep out daylight, even on a relatively overcast day. This then limits the size of the stone that can be scanned. For the taller stones, such as the one here at Greenhill in County Cork at the bottom left, capture has to either take place after dark or using a different method, which doesn't have this low light requirement. And here we tested the use of a terrestrial scanner, the Faro Focus, which has a greater range than the structured light scanner, than the handheld scanner, but has a lower resolution. This type of scanner is suited well to scanning large structures such as buildings, churches, and so on, but doesn't generally have the resolution necessary for capturing inscriptions and the minute details. So the final method here then is a type of photogrammetry, and photogrammetry is a mathematical method from which reliable measurements are obtained from photographic images taken from multiple and overlapping angles. The traditional photogrammetry process is complex, and obtaining accurate measurements requires precise knowledge of the internal geometry of the camera used. However, the development of structure from motion, known as SFM photogrammetry, now allows users with minimal specialist knowledge, such as myself, and the right software, and certainly there are some free examples, to generate accurate, high-resolution 3D models of objects with just a digital camera and a tripod. The relative inexpense and flexibility of this technique has made it the preferred method in recent years. However, structured light scanners can be preferable in certain situations, and if you have access to one. just a couple of weeks ago in our most recent fieldwork trip, myself and Gary Dempsey of Digital Heritage Age carried out a 3D survey of 6 Ogham stones in County Cork. And these were mainly standing stones in the landscape, and photogrammetry was the ideal capture method. However, 2 of the stones had been reused in the construction of a suzerain. Most Ogham stones in County Cork are actually found reused as lentils or upright supports in these underground constructions. And rather than trying to light the stones sufficiently for photogrammetry in a tight, dark space, the handheld scanner actually recorded the stones much more quickly and easily. Though there are limitations to what can be accomplished with these techniques, the outputs, that is the 3D models, can potentially reveal valuable new information about inscriptions, which in turn will produce more comprehensive and accurate interpretations and editions. Some stones are so heavily worn that the presence of text on their surfaces has only been confirmed through the use of 3D modeling and also RTI. Another advantage to 3D modeling is that it captures volumetric data, which can be used to track and study the rate of erosion on carved stone surfaces over time. This data can then be used to determine the appropriate measures to protect at-risk monuments in the future. Also, 3D models can be consulted for research purposes if the actual stone becomes lost, damaged, or is otherwise inaccessible, such as being in a suzerain. So here you see a screenshot of the 3D model of one of the Ballynaburta Ogham stones. The model is now available on Sketchfab here on the Cork 3D page. And if you want to check it out, because I'm not going to test Zoom by trying it out here. So the main aims of the Ogham in 3D project then were to capture in 3D as many as possible of the still surviving Ogham stones, and not just those in state care. We actually did record others as well, and to use the resulting 3D data to assist where possible in the reading of weathered or worn inscriptions, and also to inform conservation policy. And crucially, to make all of this data and multidisciplinary metadata on Ogham inscriptions, stones, and sites more accessible to students, researchers, and also the general public. So we achieved this to a certain extent by developing a dedicated online database, including descriptions, photographs, maps, 3D models of the stones, and all hosted by DIAS, the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. And this was launched in 2013 as a work in progress, and models continue to be added. Unfortunately, funding came to an end in 2015, and despite a few smaller fieldwork grants in the meantime, mainly through the Heritage Council and local county councils, the digital corpus remains incomplete with approximately 160 stones digitised. However, thanks to funding from the IRC and the AHRC for the new Ogham project, we started just a year ago now in August 2021, we now have the opportunity to complete this corpus and more, and I'll come to this shortly. So first, I just want to mention that from the outset, XML encoding of the Ogham inscriptions and the descriptive metadata was used, and this was following EpiDoc guidelines, a TEI XML subset specifically for epigraphic material to ensure transparency, reusability, and sustainability. For example, we marked up supporting data such as the stone type, whether the stone was also cross-inscribed, and also carving techniques used. And that's one thing you notice when you actually work with inscriptions on stone, that they're not all the same, that there is huge variation in the paleography of Ogham, which is something we're very interested in looking at and in teasing out a bit more. Within the edition itself, personal names and formula words, patronyms, are likewise tagged with links to EDIL, the Electronic Dictionary of the Irish Language, Part of speech tagging is also possible, but due to the formulaic nature of Ogham text on stone, this wasn't deemed particularly necessary or useful in this case. We could then choose how we filter or search the encoded data and display the results as a list of links to individual records, as well as visualized on a map, like OpenStreetMap. But we now plan to go much further with digitization and digital encoding of Ogham, which brings me to the new Ogham project. Our aim is to not only finally complete the digital corpus of Ogham stones in Ireland, but to extend the scope to Ogham found in Britain and beyond the earliest stone monuments to include portable objects, graffiti, and Ogham in manuscripts. On the Irish side at Maynooth University, we have the Irish PI, Professor David Stifter, Dr. Deborah Hayden, who will work on the manuscript material, and myself. And on the UK side, based in Glasgow, UK PI, Professor Catherine Forsyth, Dr. Megan Caston on the 3D recording and modeling, and the digital officer, Dr. Luca Goriento. So we are continuing to digitize using 3D and 2D methods. And I mentioned earlier recent fieldwork in County Cork. During the summer, we also completed fieldwork in County Mayo. And for the first time, we carried out fieldwork in Northern Ireland and recorded the stones there. Many of the Scottish Oghams have likewise been captured in this first year of the project. So we had a busy year of fieldwork. Portable objects with Ogham inscriptions have also been recorded in 3D for the first time at both the National Museum of Ireland and the National Museum of Scotland. In a few cases, we also used reflectance transformation imaging, RTI, which I mentioned earlier, for particularly difficult to read inscriptions. This inscribed antler tine from the National Museum of Ireland collection, for example, is just 6 centimeters long and has a very fine Ogham inscription, which is almost impossible to read with the naked eye. So RTI is a computational imaging tool based on the principles of raking light, whereby an object is illuminated from an oblique angle to emphasize its surface texture. This involves taking multiple photographs of an object from a single stationary position while illuminating the object from different angles in each photograph. The angle of the light source is calculated from the highlight it creates on a reflective sphere that is included in each image. So for photogrammetry, the camera moves around the object, but for RTI, the camera stays in one position and the light moves in a radial pattern around the object. Therefore, this technique does not produce a 3D model of the object, but what is often referred to as a 2.5D model of the surface elevation. The RTI software, namely Cultural Heritage Imaging's RTI Builder, is freely available and mathematically merges all of the images of the object into one file, which can then be relit from any angle in the software. And this is just a particularly useful technique for those very, very hard to see inscriptions. Following data capture and processing, which is currently underway, we will utilize digital tools for epigraphic and linguistic analysis to gain new insights into Ogham, its history, development, and use. And here is an example of one of the digital methods we plan to use on Ogham. And this tool is known as groove analysis, and it was developed at the Archaeological Research Laboratory at Stockholm University for use on 3D scans of Scandinavian runic inscriptions to attempt to identify the work of individual rune carvers. Our colleague Megan Caston's doctoral work on carved stone, specifically on interlace design, has shown that carefully controlled manipulation of 3D data can permit the reconstruction of worn detail and submillimeter measurement and complex statistical analysis of the microtopography of incisions or groove analysis can be used to attempt to identify the habitual motor performance of individual carvers. So basically to analyze the actual impact on the stone and try and use that detailed analysis to try to identify individual hands. So that will be one of the things that we will be looking at. It has been quite successful for runic inscriptions, but whether it'll work very well for Ogham we'll have to wait and see. Then also linguistic analysis will be carried out, and it'll be led by David Stifter, and the linguistic data will be added to the Cronhib project's Corf database, where the data will be tagged, in this case for morphological and syntactic analysis or part of speech tagging, as well as for diachronic linguistic variation. And this method was developed for Corf, and it permits detailed statistical analysis of the variation through either traditional frequentative statistics or the Cronhib's Bayesian language variation analysis. Although a very small corpus, epigraphic texts have the advantage of being contemporary sources generally linked to a specific geographical location, which has the potential to tell us something about early dialectal variation in Irish. The analysis will permit more fine-grained chronological distinctions than currently possible, allowing progress in the linguistic dating of the Ogham inscriptions and a fuller understanding of the earliest stages of the Irish language. We will also continue to use EpiDoc XML guidelines to encode our data, upgrading to the latest schema. The Ogham in 3D project used a now out-of-date version. We previously only used transliterations of the Ogham text in Roman capitals, but we have recently talked about also utilizing Unicode for Ogham transcription. However, Ogham characters in Unicode were not designed for the purpose of transcribing historical texts, more for a modern use. However, Ogham characters in Unicode, they're more not really for the purpose of transcribing historical texts. And there is an excellent blog post by Cardamom's Adrian Doyle, a guest blog post on our website exactly on this issue. So anyone who's interested in that, I'd recommend you to read that. The various changes and additions to the character set itself, some, though certainly not all of which, are catered for by Unicode, along with the changes in the position and layout on various supports, all need to be documented in human and machine readable format. But the Unicode set of Ogham characters is just too limited to cater for all the possibilities and the interpretations. As pointed out by Adrian, the digital version of Ogham is yet another adaptation of this script to a new medium, and one that is still being worked out. We also have other languages and scripts occurring on Ogham objects alongside Irish and Ogham, such as the Latin language and script on pillar stones in Wales and Southeast England, and potentially Pictish in Scotland. Some XML tags are now more important, for example, material type and object type, as we're no longer only dealing with stone pillars. One of the aspects we intend to focus on, in particular on the Ogham project, is the much neglected paleography of Ogham. We aim to propose a vocabulary for describing Ogham paleography on all media, and ultimately to produce a classification of the various forms of the script. This will then be used to align Ogham with EpiDoc conventions for recording epigraphic transcriptions, which is also rather limited when it comes to transcribing the complexities of Ogham and also the Irish language. So for example, how to deal with initial mutations. Originally designed for classical epigraphy, EpiDoc is expanding and updating to include other scripts and languages. This new Ogham classification will help us to map and date the introduction and spread of innovative forms and features. It would also facilitate exploring the interaction of support material, carving technique, and script type. A better understanding of these phenomena will allow us to identify chronologically diagnostic styles or features, which in tandem with linguistic analysis would permit us to date Ogham inscriptions with more confidence and precision. This slide, this is an example of aligning EpiDoc with, in this case, the cuneiform, the open, richly annotated cuneiform corpus, and we hope to do the same now with EpiDoc and Ogham. In the first year of the Ogham project, we have initiated collaboration with other digital epigraphy projects, particularly those working with runic inscriptions, as there are a number of parallels between scripts and their use, as well as with the broader digital epigraphy community regarding issues such as standards and interoperability, and particularly with the EpiDoc community. So before I run out of time, I want to say a little bit more, or say a little bit about the Irish inscriptions in the Latin insular script and the EMILI project. So while Ogham was being adapted for use on stone in Scotland in the post-7th century, in Ireland, there was a gradual move from the Ogham-inscribed pillars to more overtly Christian inscribed grey slabs using this insular Latin script or scripts, and almost always with crosses of various types and forms. Early Irish inscriptions in the Latin alphabet are in fact more numerous than Ogham inscriptions, with at least 600 known from Ireland, although the exact number has yet to be established. We have a few examples of what appear to be transitionary inscribed stones, which contain text in Latin letters, but retain features of Ogham inscribed stones, such as the use of upright pillars and vertical text. So, for example, here, the 7th century Kilunton pillar, where you have some Ogham on the edge and you have the Latin script text on the face. But again, as I said, the text, even though the Ogham is incomplete, they don't look to be equivalent. And then on the right, for comparison, a 10th century cross slab from Clonmacnoise. One particularly early inscription in the Latin alphabet that otherwise has features more akin to Ogham inscriptions is the Inchigill stone shown here. Another change, not yet on the Inchigill example, is the type of formula used. So from Ogham, we had the typical formula was X Mochi Y, or X son of Y, to the Latin script on cross slabs with, again, typically Christian formula variants, with Oro Do, a prayer for, or Bendacht for, a blessing on. So Professor David Stifter and myself at Maynooth University were co-investigators on the first phase of the EMILI project, that's early medieval Irish Latinate inscriptions, supported by DIAS, the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies, and funded by the Royal Irish Academy. This project aims to make freely available a searchable digital corpus, including digital editions of all early Irish Latin alphabet inscriptions, particularly on stone, but also, like with the Ogham corpus, inscriptions on portable objects of various materials. The website is undergoing the final stages of development, and we plan to officially launch in a couple of months now with a selection of stones documented. Again, we're using EpiDoc XML, but in this case, we have decided to test FS, which stands for EpiDoc Front-End Services, to publish the inscriptions online. Once again, the database is hosted by DIAS, and the customization of FS is being carried out by Jeff Buka in the IT department at DIAS, who also developed the Ogham in 3D website. I hope I have maybe enough time just to show you a few quick examples that have been digitized so far. Oops, sorry, went too far there. So here is the cross lab from Moybollock in County Cavan, which is a recent discovery published by Brian O'Callaghan and David Stifter and recorded in 3D by Gary Dempsey using photogrammetry. And this is an inscription with the abbreviated form of the word Orod, prayer, which you can see here, the OR with the suspension stroke, marked up here using the elements expan for expanded word, and abra for abbreviation, and the X then for, here it is, for the editorial expansion. So the word Orod is also tagged with the lemma corresponding to the entry for this word in EDIL. And even the space between the two words has been marked up here, 1 unit. Personal names are tagged differently to other words as NIMREFs, so that they can be indexed separately. And with this, we can easily create indices. For example, lemmata showing which inscriptions contain each lemma, and also the language of each, mainly Irish, GA, but interestingly, some Latin words and a few inscriptions entirely in Latin, and even one inscription in Greek. There's also an index of words which lists the actual forms found in the inscriptions. Here we have an index of personal names, or rather a section of it. Unfortunately, we don't have enough information on most of these to identify them with individuals named in other sources. However, we have a couple of notable exceptions. The first one here is probably our longest inscription in Early Irish from Kilmansogart in County Armagh. The obit of the individual named in the inscription is noted in the annals in 714 and 716 AD, making this the earliest datable Latin alphabet inscription in Irish. Others are mainly approximately dated on linguistic evidence. Another example occurs in an inscription not on a stone monument, but on a portable metal handbell, also from County Armagh. The death of this individual may also be recorded in the annals of Ulster, although it is less certain in this case. We can link here again with other digital resources such as CELT, the Corpus of Electronic Text from UCC, with the digital version of the annals. One final but important index in EMILI is that of places, places where the inscriptions are found. The place names are given in English and Irish, as well as the external links to the National Place Names database, loganam.ie. So I think it's time to finish. With both of these projects on Irish epigraphy, we aim to use various digital tools and methods to gain a better understanding of the early Irish language, as well as the other languages found in the text and the interactions between them. The earliest phases of the development of writing in Ireland and Britain, the relationships between language, script and support, and the later development of the Ogham script in particular.
Hey, thank you very much for such an interesting talk. So do we have any questions for Nora? I see one in the chat already. So Christelle is asking, are there any traces of pigment found on monumental Ogham stones?
That hasn't been tested yet, as far as I know. I know that there is work going on stone monuments elsewhere in Scotland. I think somebody is working on that, but for Ogham, I don't think it has been tested. So it would be an interesting thing to check out for sure.
Some other questions? So one thing that's always puzzled me, and maybe you know, is I mean, it's claimed you said in your talk that Ogham probably derives from Latin script. What is the evidence really that this was Latin script that they were based on, or was it an independent invention, or looking at some other scripts, for example, runic scripts in contact with Vikings?
Well, the contact at the time, the main contact would have been with the Roman Empire. The evidence, well, I suppose the main evidence is that Ogham is alphabetic. So, you know, it's based on an alphabet as opposed to any other type of script. So, and the obvious one, I suppose, is Latin. Also, the separation of vowels and consonants, and you know, there are a few linguistic reasons why it's not absolutely certain, but it certainly does appear to be that Latin was the main influence. And also, it does appear to have been, you know, a one-off creation by one or a small group of people. And then, of course, later on, new characters started to be added and changes to the layout of the script and so on.
Okay, thanks. Good. Are there other questions?
I might ask a question if that's all right.
Yeah.
Well, but before I do, Nora, thanks very much for another very informative talk. I know I've mentioned to you in person before how interesting it is that you're taking a completely different look at digital text as a concept. But it strikes me now as companies like you know, Facebook and Nvidia and Apple are kind of struggling to plant their flag in the whole metaverse, that even 10 years ago you said you were already working on getting 3D models together for these kinds of for these kinds of inscriptions is very telling for the how forward thinking the work is. My question is regarding, you showed language codes in one of your very last slides there. Are they standard ISO codes you're using, or are you using some variation of them?
They're standard ISO codes as far as I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
The reason I ask is the one you showed for Irish GA, as far as I know, relates only to modern Irish, and there are specific separate ones for primitive, old, and Middle Irish.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it might be something to look into.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Adrian. I will check that out. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much again.
Right. Any other questions? I see a hand up. Nitish?
Yeah, hi, I am Nitish here. I'm doing like masters at NUI Galway. I want to understand, like, this project looks very interesting, like understanding the early Irish languages, symbols, and using digital methods to understand them. Like at my stage, like, how should I involve, like what should be my first step, or the project is already ongoing? I just want to get a clarity on this part.
You want to know if the work is ongoing? Is that what?
Yeah, like is the project already ongoing, or there are any applications which I can like apply for this project, or?
Okay, so like online resources that are already available.
Okay.
Yeah, I can put something in the chat now. Just give me a second. The new project, the new Ogham project, started a year ago. So at the moment, we have a website, which I'm just going to put in the chat now. Just bear with me. We haven't got the database ready yet. We still have quite a bit of work to do. Oops. But we do have a website where we share blog posts and things like that, information about Ogham that might be interesting. Sorry, I'm trying to find the chat here and I can't find it now. Oh, yeah, there it is. So I'll just put this in here. So it's one way of finding out what's happening. So that's our website, where we have blog posts and all the latest developments in the project. And then by the end of the project, it's ongoing now for the next few years, or for the next 2 years, until 2024. And at the end of the project, then we hope to publish the online digital corpus, basically, of all Ogham, or as many as we can get done.
Thanks, Nora. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Any other questions? Okay. In that case, I'd like to thank our speaker again. It was a very interesting talk, interesting topic, and I wish you good luck with the project. And I think you've got a lot of work to do, but it will be very valuable.
We do indeed. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
The next seminar will be next month with a speaker to be announced. So. Okay. Okay. Okay, good. And we'll put the talk up on YouTube as well. So send you the link when that's ready.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Just
okay. Thanks again. And yeah, really interesting talk. Okay. Have a nice day.
Thank you. Bye now.
Okay. Bye-bye.